right, welcome back to class. In the last video, we had reviewed the past simple, but we had only focused on the affirmative, so the statements. What we're going to be focusing on today is how to form a negative and how to form questions. It would be good if you watched the previous video. Some of the ideas there might be useful here. But what I really recommend that you know, so this is going to be a lot easier, is how to form negative and how to form questions in the present. I also made a video on that, so make sure to check that out. But reviewing the negative and questions in the present should help you with the structure in the past, because the structure is very similar. It's mostly the same. Okay? All right. So first, negatives. If you remember, when we had in the present, you would have two different situations that could happen. One of them is when you don't have the verb to be, and then the other one is when you do have the verb to be. The way you form the negative and the way you form the question is a little bit different. So for this first example, I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then I will explain it. It says, I played tennis last week, but I didn't play yesterday. Okay, this first part is mostly just an example. This is a statement in the past simple. It's what we already reviewed. You can see you have the verb in the past, which is played. Now, this second part of the sentence is the negative. You're going to notice two things. There's a word here, this word in orange, which is what makes the sentence negative. And then you're also going to notice that your verb is going to be in the base. So you have the word play, like nothing changes, okay? So the rule for forming the negative is you add the word did, right? So these three letters, did. Then you also have to add the word not. Okay, so did not. Now, in the example, you'll see that both of those words are together because they're using what's called the contraction. So didn't. Okay. After you use that word, didn't, then you can just add the verb, so play, and it's going to be negative. So this works for any combination. You can say didn't play, didn't walk, didn't listen, didn't run, didn't jump. It always works the same. The structure is always the same. And in fact, down here you have the structure. You'll see it's using go for the example. So again, didn't, which here you can see it's separated, did not. Okay, good. This is when you don't have the verb be. Okay, I'm going to read the further examples. You didn't like the beach. They didn't buy the big expensive car. She did not talk to anyone before the exam. I didn't eat all the chocolate. Emily didn't enjoy the theme park as much as Sarah. Hugh did not cycle to work today. Okay, so you have two examples here where it's separated, did not. And then you have four examples where you use the contraction, didn't. Now, contraction and separated for the most part is the same. Don't worry too much about that. Use what's mostly comfortable for you. That's the best way to manage it. And you'll see all of the verbs are in the base. So like, buy, talk, cycle, enjoy, eat. So even though it's a past tense, the past is represented with the word did, because did, if you remember, is the past of do. And if you remember in the present, when we talked about negatives, you would use the word do or sometimes does, right? You had to choose depending on the person or the subject. Here with did, it's the only option, so you use it with every subject or every person. All right, let's move on to the second page. Great. For the second page we have here, we're going to focus on using the verb be, right? In the previous page, we saw the example like I didn't play, where you're using any verb like play, jump, run, sing, okay? In this case, we're going to see what happens when you use the verb be. Now, if you remember from the previous video, the verb be has two different forms in the past. It can be was when you're talking singular, or were when you're talking plural. Okay? The rule is going to be the same for both. And the rule essentially is add not after the verb be. So you're not going to be using did, okay? You don't need the word did anymore when you have the verb be. You only need not, okay? So in these two examples, the book was interesting, but the movie was not. The books were great, but the movies were not. You're going to notice they used not in both cases after was and were. Again, was is singular, you can see movie, and were is plural, so movies. Here you have a reminder of that structure. So the movie was not interesting, the movies were not interesting. It works exactly the same. And if you remember from the present, again, it was the same idea. In the present, you have three different forms for the verb be, which is am, is, are. And for all three of those cases, you would also use not. So is not, am not, are not. Okay? Here in the past, it's was not and were not. You'll notice, and I'll mark it here in the examples, you also have the option of the contraction. So let's read the further examples. Kate was not feeling well. My parents were not pleased. The cat wasn't in the house. The computers weren't working. So the first two on top is exactly what we already saw. Kate was not, and then my parents were not. The bottom two have the contraction. So wasn't is the same as was not, and then weren't is the same as were not. Remember when you're forming the contraction, there's going to be one letter missing from the second word. So in this case, for not, you're missing the letter O. And you're going to use this symbol, which is the apostrophe, to show the letter that is missing. That's everything for the negatives. Let's move on to the questions, which is the next page. Okay, now for forming questions, you're going to have a very similar situation. Again, you have the two possibilities. When you don't have be and when you do have be. Okay, first, we're going to focus when you don't have be. I'm going to read the example and then I'm going to explain it. They bought a new car. Did they buy a new car? Okay, let's focus on this. Here, the first part they mention, they bought a new car. This is a affirmative, okay? It is a statement. You have the word bought, which is the past of the verb buy, okay? When you make this into a question, you are going to do two things primarily. The first thing is add the word did. Okay, this is the same you were using for the negative. The difference is did goes at the beginning of the question. So you start the question with did. And then for the verb, you're going to use the base form. And again, this is the same as the negative. So instead of saying, did they bought a new car? You have to say, did they buy a new car? Because you're using the base. Okay? Those are the two main things you pay attention. Nothing changes order, really. That's the only two rules that you have to remember for this part. Now, let's look at the second example, which is a little bit different. The statement says, she visited her parents last week. Okay? Now, if I want to make this statement into a question, similar to the first example, I would say, did she visit her parents last week? Because I have to add the did and then use the base, which is visit. Now, in the example they give you here, it's a different situation because you're making a different question for the same situation, for the same answer. Okay. If you remember what an open question is, which we talked about when reviewing questions in the present, this is the same. So you have the question, did she visit last week? Okay, which follows the same structure, right? But you also have this new word at the beginning, which is who. If you remember, this is called a question word or a WH question because it makes it an open question. It's the same as what we saw before. The difference is you add the question word at the beginning and it makes it open. So when you answer an open question, it's a little bit more complicated. You need more information to respond. Okay? All right. Hopefully that is clear. If you have doubts, remember to leave them in the comments and I'll try to solve them. Here you have the structure again. So start the question with did, then the subject or the person, then the verb in the base form. Okay? Let me read the examples. You have three simple ones, closed questions, and then three with the question words, so open. Did they have a good time? Did you read a book on the beach? Did Ray drink all the milk? Where did she meet her friends? When did he go to the gym? Why did you buy so much food? Okay, so again, you'll notice they all have the same structure. Start the question with did, have the person, and then have the verb in the base form. And if you want to make it open, use a question word at the beginning. Let's move on to the final page. Great. So for the final page, as I mentioned before, we are still reviewing questions for the past simple. The difference is, in this case, what happens when you have the verb be. And the answer is it's the same as the present. So if you remember how to make a question in the present, simple, then you know how to make a question in the past simple with be. Okay. I'll read these two examples. They have the statement first and then the version with the question. She was excited. Was she excited? You were excited. Were you excited? Okay. So the thing you have to remember, The passive be, again, is the same in the negative we saw. So was and were. Was is for singular, were is for plurals. And then the rule is when you make a question, you switch the two positions. So you can see in the statement, it's the person or the subject, then the verb, and then the rest of the sentence. When you make the question, you start with the verb, be. Then you have the person, and then the rest of the sentence. Was she excited? Were you excited? You can see it's the same. And for question words, which we reviewed on the previous page, you can just add at the beginning of the question, and it makes a question word. So really, you don't really need to add anything except when you make an open question. Okay? So this is very easy. You just switch the positions of the two words in the beginning. Let me read through the further examples. Was he good at playing tennis? Were they surprised by you? Why was she late for the party? What was that song called? Was there any cake at the party? Were we the last ones to arrive? What were the lectures about? What was the weather like? Okay, so the four questions here at the beginning are the same as before. Start with the verb be, was, were, and then you have the person, okay, he, they, their, we, and then the rest of the sentence. And the bottom, it's again almost the same thing, except at the beginning you're adding the question word because you are making an open question. So why, what, and what again. And then the actual verb be, so was, were, was, and then the person. So she, that song, the lectures, the weather. Okay, good. So you would have seen this is very easy. If you remember how to do questions and negatives in the present, it follows the same structure for making questions and negatives in the past. So again, if you reviewed the present, then reviewing the past becomes much easier, hopefully. If you have any doubts, let me know. I'll try to help as much as possible. And hopefully I'll be seeing you around for the next topic that we'll be discussing.